All right, everyone, we are back with another low budget logistics. Found myself with a lot of time on my hands, so we're going to just keep on rolling with it. We are back with a new show, though. It's going to be totally revamped. You see, I'm no longer in my restroom trying to figure out the oddities of actually shooting film. I do have this wonderful TV, made a new change, no longer in Austin, which is fine, up in a different area. So we're going to bring you several stories today that are going to be entertaining, hopefully going to be explaining what is going on, maybe some news that you probably didn't know. But today, it's just me. It's just me. Well, I do have some upgraded staff. I've got my cat Taco over here. If you see any lint on my shirt, it is from her. She likes to lay on my things. Yes, her name is Taco. Yes, she's a cat. Yes, that is a palindrome because I am first and foremost an English nerd. That's okay. Producer Henry, he's over in the back there giving me looks. He helped me with the lighting and with the screen. So we are going to get to it. Still the same content, same me, just going to get more of it. Let's get into it. Maybe at some point we will get a little desk up here. Who knows? Let's see if it's going to advance. All right, Canada Post is back, baby. Back in the news. That is, back in the news, Canada Post. What's happening up there? So Canada Post, as of last Friday, said, no, we're not back at work. Now, I want to make one thing very clear. They've been on strike since December. The government just forced them back to work. And they said, we're not working anymore. Why is that? Don't want to work because they want... Sorry. Why is that? Well, Canada Post, the Postal Workers Union, believes that they are not being paid fairly. They have some issues with some restructuring that the government wants to undertake for deliveries of mail, and kind of really restructuring what's actually happening with Canada Post and how that entire business works. Now, before we go into that, we should understand what's actually happening with Canada Post as a company. Every day that Canada Post is delivering packages or delivering anything, they are running a $10 million deficit, which means every day that they're at work, every day, calendar day of the year, they are losing $10 million, period. That's just against all operating costs, what have you. They're losing money hand over fist. Something to the tune of $814 million has been lost or is in deficit as of right now. So Canada Post is basically insolvent, and the government, because Canada Post is not necessarily a part of the government, they're called a crown enterprise, so they work independently of the actual governmental system. They're not necessarily getting tax dollars to fund their operations, but they are affiliated, we'll call it like that. The U.S. Postal Service is in a similar situation where they are not technically a part of the government. They are their own company, they are their own entity, but they do have requirements that the government does help fund, at least here in the U.S. Specifically in the U.S., the Postal Service delivers to every zip code in America. Most carriers do not do that. Why? Because it's extremely difficult and it's extremely expensive. And so Canada Post is under the same requirements, or especially around rural deliveries. Now, Canada's population is very different than the US. They live very close to the US border, but there are a lot of zip codes in Canada. So a lot of the rural areas might not see any deliveries for quite some time. They've been impacted. They're going to be the most impacted. So anyways, all that to say that the Canada Post management is in discussions with the Canada Post Union, Workers Union, and there's an impasse, right? The management, the government is wanting to restructure how they're operating. So what the Postal Service has been is delivering a letter type mail, smaller individual things that are paid for by a postage stamp. Now, that was a good business. It was very profitable. The problem is we are not sending letters anymore. We're sending parcels. And that requires a different infrastructure as you try to deliver things. So as that parcel volume increases, the letter mail drops off and you have to retool your operation to be profitable in that new environment. The other problem with making a shift of that type is that it is extremely competitive. You have US and other national or other global brands like UPS and FedEx that are delivering already into Canada with their various parcel solutions. There are also other companies that have been grown up domestically in Canada. I'm thinking of Purolator off the top of my head, that do those types of deliveries. There's lots of ways to get parcels into Canadian homes, and so Canada Post is going to face an uphill battle trying to be competitive in that market. Now, obviously, they have some significant benefits, some significant advantages, specifically because they're basically going to be backed by the entirety of the Canadian government, but they do need to change and make some really difficult cuts if they want to find a way to solvency, right? If they want to find a way to be profitable. Canadian Postal Workers Union is not willing to budge. I think the Canadian government came back and provided them with a 13% increase in salary across the board. The Canadian Postal Workers Union said, no thanks, we want a higher number. I think it was somewhere between 16 and 19% increase. Although the figures elude me right now, I want to say it's closer to 16 than it is 19. So they're about 3% different, although that does amount to, significant dollars. What does this mean though for you? Because most of my viewers are going to be in the US. Well, what that means is that about 34% of Canadian e-commerce, specifically e-commerce, comes from the US. The last time this happened, which was in the holiday of last year of 2024, US Postal Service was holding all their shipments in Chicago. They were holding everything that was in transit in Chicago, hoping for some solution, hoping for some work coming back on before they would actually move anything. So they were holding things on the US side, which created a huge backlog. What they were also doing is actually proactively returning things. So if anything was labeled, right, if you're shipping from your warehouse to Canada, labeled with a Canadian address, the U.S. Postal Service was just simply turning it around at that first stop. So you were seeing a lot of returns, right, return to sender for valid addresses, valid shipment IDs, but they were not getting into the postal system because it wasn't worth the U.S. Postal System's while to actually even move it to Chicago. So they were returning them from the first stop back to your dock, and you were just going to hold it. So again, millions of packages were getting held. Customers were getting issues, and so it became a huge customer service nightmare. I'm trying to explain what was going on. Now, thankfully, a lot of Canadians were familiar with the situation and knew what was actually going on, but still, you would get customers who just didn't know, and that's okay. So anyways, Canada Post, we'll see what actually happens with that. The writing seems to be on the wall. They're going to have to change some operations up. They're going to have to make some changes as far as restructuring, maybe laying off some workers, changing up how deliveries are even made. There was one from the research I was doing, I saw a lot of discussion around community mailboxes in both rural and urban environments where, a postal worker delivers to one specific location and they're delivering a lot of mail in one area. Now, that's great for the mail carrier. He only has to make one stop, but that means extra hassle, added issues for the customers that are going to have to go and make another journey to go get their stuff. We see that here in the US in housing developments where there's a lot of deliveries that are made. You've seen in apartment buildings. It is especially prevalent in Europe, surprisingly. The Europeans are really okay with deliveries to a central location. So it's great for their postal systems. They have to make, like I said, one delivery. And then at the customer's leisure, they're able to go to the drop box and get their parcels. So we'll see what happens in Canadian Post, but that one probably flew under the radar for most people, and it will be a big business impact, especially if you do cross-border operations, especially e-commerce, as it's been relatively easy. That's normally the first place that companies move to when they move across a border. So it's a good kind of test to see how it's done before you start branching off into Europe or other localities. So that's the first biggest piece of news for today. And let's move on to our next story. Is this an emergency? Is the trade deficit an emergency? That is a great question, and that is a question that's up to the Supreme Court right now. So here in the US, as everyone who's probably watching this knows, the president has been extremely tariff happy because he views the trade deficit as an emergency situation, and has been granted powers by the U.S. Congress to enact tariffs as in emergent situations. Now, there have been several rulings from lower courts, from a district court and an appellate court here in the U.S. that have strucken down that definition of an emergency, right? I think we can all probably agree that not really an emergent issue. It's not an emergency, as you might call it. And so the case has been brought to, like I said, a district court and to an appellate court. Those judges in both instances have indicated that this is not the correct application of the definition of an emergency. It is not the correct application of the powers that have been delegated to the president. And the administration has obviously appealed up to the highest court in the land. So we are waiting for the Supreme Court to answer the question of, is a trade deficit an emergency? We'll see what they rule. I believe they have until November, so we're probably still waiting another month for a ruling back from the Supreme Court. If that happens, there's about $165 billion worth of tariffs that are going to be in limbo. And the question is, how do importers get that money back from the government? Obviously, the U.S. government is not a big fan of handing money out willy-nilly, especially with some like $165 billion. So we'll see what actually happens. We'll see what portion of that money is actually going to be able to be returned to importers. But they should see some significant windfall if the Supreme Court does, in fact, rule against the Trump administration. It will probably require, if you're watching this and you are an importer, it will probably require significant paperwork that your customs broker should have for you. You might need to do some logging in to the CBP website. You might need to actually create an account in the CBP website to see what has been imported under your name, because if you were like me, you did not know this even was a possibility of a thing, but you need to have access to Customs and Border Patrol systems, and the way to do that is to apply and log in, is to apply for a login with Customs and Border Patrol on their system. cbp.org is where you would need to go for that information and to get your login that is going to be tied to your company. That login will then allow your customs brokers to work on your behalf, because they're probably the ones keeping all of the records that will be required for any refunds that might be coming out. So word to the wise, start now, because it does take some time to get those logins and to get approval from Customs and Border Patrol. But we are made with the wonderful partnership of a company called Parabola. Now the question that you're probably asking, what is Parabola? What do they do? Well, they are the easy button for operators like you and I. What do they do? Like I said, they make your life easier. They make it easier through advanced automation for business intelligence. Now, you're probably asking yourself, what does that mean, Matt? Well, it means that if you have an engine, there's probably oil or grease in that engine to make things run nice and smooth, right? Keep the friction down, and that is what Parabola does. If you are an e-commerce operator, you probably have several different large systems that give you outputs on a regular basis, right? You probably have your front-end system that's actually doing all of the sales on your website. You have some back-end engine that is actually processing those orders. You have probably an ERP or maybe WMS. You have all of these different systems that are all taking in data that you need as an operator, and you are probably frustrated with some aspect of that work. Now, what Parabola steps in is they make all of that simpler. I know that there are lots of processes where I would have to go in to log into a system, create an export, manipulate that data in an Excel or in an CSV, and then take that information and hand it to somewhere else, or present it to some executive because it needed some level of analysis. Those tasks are repetitive. They happen on a very regular basis. They happen all the time. Every one of you watching this show probably has those instances and probably has those same issues. What Parabola does is it automates that whole process. So instead of doing that work every single week, you set it up once and then off it goes, right? There is an old commercial called for Ronco. You just set it and forget it, baby. And that's what Parabola does for you. They do a lot of other things. So if you're in the logistics and international transportation space, you're probably getting bills of lading or arrival notices, what have you, via email, because most freight forwarders are not super tech savvy. So they're giving you information that you need and your warehouse needs in PDF or email format. What you can do with Parabola, and they're wonderful tools, is you can set up an automated process that receives that information, automatically spits it into whatever tracker you're getting, sends it to your warehouse, let them know what day they're going to be delivering on, what packages are going to be coming in that, what the quantities, the inventory looks like, what the SKUs are. It can even do things such as advanced as sending emails to buyers, let them know that their packages are going to be delivered soon. So Parabola is your all-in-one business automation source. They have widespread integrations with most every software that you're probably using. And with their additional AI tools, they make life even easier for you. So you no longer have to learn a new programming language and how to tell Parabola what you want it to do. You can just simply tell the AI, hey, here's my issue, here's what I'm trying to do, and it will build what they call flows for you. So I cannot recommend Parabola enough. They've been great friends to me personally. They are fantastic to work with, and I highly recommend them. And with their very generous referral program, you can help this show grow. So thank you very much, Parabola. On the topic of growing the show, I should also mention, if you're watching this, please subscribe to the video. That helps us grow. The logistics content on YouTube is extremely small, and so we are trying to grow as a brand in that market. People need to know what's going on, especially as the administration continues to do things, and as global events change, we will continue to be the source on YouTube for information and news. And hopefully we are entertaining as well. So without further ado, let's get on to our last story of the day, which is more tariffs. Isn't it a joy? So as I mentioned previously in the earlier segment, the Trump administration has been granted the ability to continue to apply tariffs as they have seen under the IEEPA, the emergency powers that have been delegated to the president, while the Supreme Court deliberates. While the Supreme Court deliberates, the administration has continued to apply tariffs. As of last week, they decided that they wanted to apply tariffs on large vehicles, right? I'm talking the tractor units for 18-wheelers. So I'm thinking of the big trucks running on the road. Those are now going to be more expensive. What that means as far as U.S. trucking, we're not entirely sure. There's some other issues that we'll talk about in a second regarding driver's licenses, but the Trump administration has added tariffs. They've doubled down on those, especially for imported parts for automobiles in the heavy industrial truck scale. The other thing that they've been applying, they are applying a new batch of tariffs on is pharmaceuticals. Especially most of the pharmaceuticals here in the U.S. come from precursor elements that are made somewhere else. So a lot of that is made in China, and obviously the Trump administration has taken a very heavy hand in regards to China. So pharmaceuticals are going to be impacted, and then as well, heavy trucks are going to be impacted. So the last thing I want to talk about in domestic trucking news is that the Department of Transportation and other government agencies have been taking a look at CDL licenses. And the question is, do we allow non-domiciled, non-US drivers to drive commercially? So they are re-looking at a lot of issues. They're looking at the licensing. Licenses come from states. So they're looking at state licensing. And the expectation is something to the tune of 15,000 drivers might come off of the road. If we see that, there will certainly be an impact in trucking rates here domestically in the FTL and LTL side. So that will also affect parcel, because parcel also moves FTL and LTL, especially so when you reduce the amount of drivers that are available to drive, rates go up because everything gets more expensive. Is it a good thing or a bad thing? I am not going to tell you that. It is just a thing you should know about. I will not make the determination on my personal opinions here, but just know that rates will probably start to increase. We might have seen the base floor for over-the-road trucking. So good news for brokers who I know have been having a tough time as of late, as volumes have fallen. So that is all the news that I'm going to talk about today. I hope you enjoyed the show. As I said, like and subscribe. If you're listening on podcast, please drop us a follow. It helps us grow. If you have any questions, please feel free to let me know in the comments below if there's anything that you want me to cover specifically. Again, comments are great. I love to read them. So I do read all of my comments. Yeah, that being said, welcome back to the channel. We will be producing more content, me and producer Henry over there. My cat Taco is asleep just outside of camera. But stay tuned as we continue to give you all the news that you need to know for logistics and supply chain. Thanks so much. Have a great day.